Welcome to AP Euro for Winners.
Today, we are continuing Unit 3 with two lessons, continuities and changes to economic practice and development, and economic development and mercantilism. It's a mouthful.
Let's break it all down. We're going to start with mercantilism. We've talked about this before. Mercantilism, nice, good definition here, okay? Three parts. State-driven economic system, which emphasizes the buildup of mineral wealth by means of a favorable balance of trade. We're going to break down each one of those bolded parts for you. First, let's talk about the state-driven economic system, and we're going to use an example from England called the Navigation Acts. This is a series of laws created by this guy Oliver Cromwell, who's very much hated in the colonies. But anyway, basically what the laws say is that the British colonies can only trade with Britain. So they are not allowed to try to find the highest bidder. Maybe it's France or Spain or whatever. No, stuff made in Britain, stuff made in the British colonies has to be sold back to Britain. The colonies aren't going to like this because they're not going to make as much money, but it's going to help Britain make a ton of money. And this is an example of how mercantilism is an economic system run by the state. So the state is controlling who is trading, who can they trade with. Economic system run by the state.
All right, let's break down that emphasizing a buildup of mineral wealth. And this is when foreign lands are going to provide raw materials, finished goods, laborers, and markets for the commercial and industrial enterprises in Europe. Right? So we're talking about the empires here, empire advantage. So we have an increase in demand for New World crops and resources. We have things like American corn and sweet potatoes are going to be seen all around the world. We've got in China, Mediterranean, parts of Africa, so the spreading of those goods. The most valuable export from Americas that we want you to know is number 1, sugar, and then number 2 is tobacco. So those two cash crops. Animal husbandry is going to become more similar around the world. Right, and if you haven't heard that term, that's pretty much the domestication of animals and selective breeding for food purposes. Right, so we're also going to have the introduction of horses and cattle to the New World. And then also with everything else, gold and silver demand are going to go up because you're going to have those in South America. So if you haven't heard that word demand 6 times already, I'm telling you it again because that's the biggest thing here. That's driving this buildup of mineral wealth. And then also, this is going to expand the economics of mercantilist countries or the economies. So they're going to be hugely dependent upon the slave trade, right? None of this could be possible, especially sugar and tobacco, without the slaves in the field to create and produce those goods, according to the people at that time anyway. So the backbone of all this is the slave trade. 4/5 of everything produced is going to be from slave labor. It was seen as a legitimate business until the 18th century. And not that you need to know this, but between 1495 and 1700, about 12 million slaves were shipped to the Americas from Africa, which is a lot. And then between 1700 and 1800, we got about 6 million. It's a lot of people.
Moving on to the third part of our definition of mercantilism is the favorable balance of trade. And so what's important to know here is that countries want to export more than they import, meaning they want to sell stuff to other countries more than they get in. Okay. And so how are they going to do that? Again, this is through the colonies. The colonies are going to provide raw materials for the mother countries, and the mother countries are then going to take those raw materials, make them into stuff, sell them back to the colonies, and it's going to make a lot of money for these countries that are mercantilist. So the overseas products and the influences contributed to the development of a consumer culture in Europe. There's a huge demand for American luxury products. So I like to kind of think of mercantilism. I've heard this analogy of like a pie. And this is the theory that there's only so much money in the world, all right? It's a limited amount. And so if a country wants to make more, they need to get more stuff out of the ground. They need to export more to another country. If you want to make more, you have to make another country poorer, right? There's only so many slices of the pie. So that's kind of how I think about it. And all those three phases are how they're getting more pie.
And we're going to see mercantilism kind of become the backbone for what this thing called the agricultural revolution. So mercantilism, again, run by the government, but there's also this agricultural revolution happening at the same time because, well, how is society going to adjust to all of these new foods that the world now has access to? So that's where we insert the agricultural revolution. And we're going to use the definition of new technologies and access to new foods are going to create more people, and more people are going to mean more free time, right? There's only so much to be done with a certain amount of people. So the agricultural revolution is going to raise productivity and increase in food supply in about 1750 to 1850, so that 100 years. You're going to see the leaders of this being the English and the Dutch. We're going to see a population explosion, like we said, especially with access to more food. When you have a surplus amount of people, we're going to see more urbanization. Crop rotation with no fallow periods are going to also increase food supply. And then again, we saw with animal husbandry with more food and selective breeding.
Some other ideas that make this possible. Some of this is a review for you. Some technology and a law here. The seed drill from 1701, invented by Jethro Tull. Basically, this is a machine that you see on the right that plants seeds at exact intervals, and it just makes it super fast to plant all your crops. We have the Enclosure Act of 1773. This allows landowners to fence off their land, remove commoners' right of access to their land. This is going to increase crop production in a roundabout way because essentially we're going to have less farms, but they're going to be bigger farms, and bigger farms are going to be able to be more efficient. And it's also going to force people off their land because they can't farm in the commons anymore, and they're going to have to move to the cities. And we'll talk about what they do there and or how they replace their farming jobs in the countryside as well. Last piece of technology is called the threshing machine from 1786. Removes the seeds from stalks of grains like wheat or rye. Just again, it's important to have some of this evidence in case you have to write an essay on this so that you know how the agricultural revolution happened.
All right, so now we're going to see the importation of food. Again, we're seeing the similar theme throughout this PowerPoint. So the importation and transplantation of agricultural products from the Americas means that there's more food in Europe. Common exchange is going to allow this to happen. We've got potatoes, especially potatoes, huge because the peasants now actually have something they can afford, they can eat, it becomes a staple. Potatoes are big. But we also see things like tomatoes, corn, pumpkins, beans, pepper, tobacco, right? All these products coming from the New World. And mostly England is going to have this colony monopoly. England's going to be definitely forefront of all this.
So this is a new idea here, and I want you us to think. So we have all this new food because of the Columbian Exchange, because of the agricultural revolution. Because we have more food and we're more productive with these new inventions, not as many people have to farm, which means that there are people with free time. And while people are moving to the cities, we're going to talk a little bit about what they're doing in the countryside cottages, and it's called cottage industry. Another name for it is the putting out system. So basically, families in these countryside cottages are given what's called piecework to be done after the farming was done, or if they didn't have any farming to do because of the Enclosure Act. This is kind of like a little side hustle where workers are making things by hand because, again, we have a lot of underemployed or unemployed people to make this system work. And it's going to allow the people who own these businesses, these entrepreneurs, to avoid guild regulations. Now, a guild is like an early trade union that usually occurs in a city where there's a lot of restrictions on what you can and cannot do and who can work for you. And in the countryside, they don't have these, which is why this cottage industry flourishes.
Let's continue on talking about the cottage industry. So merchant and workshop owners are going to be paying people per piece. So merchants are going to go and have loans and they're going to put out raw materials to other people and they're going to eventually exchange that for a finished work by the time the process is over. And we're going to show you a little graphic next slide to kind of help you make sense of that a little bit more. So again, this is going to encourage people to make more products, right? Because the more products you're going to make, the more you're going to get paid from this merchant. So putting out system is a huge precursor to the factory system of the Industrial Revolution. So anytime you're looking for context for that, cottage industry putting out system, that's going to allow for the Industrial Revolution, factory system, and then the evolution of capitalism.
All right, here's a little graphic for you just to show you kind of how it would work, right? We have the raw materials on the left. That's owned by the merchant. They're going to loan those out to the spinners, and then it goes to the weavers that are working in their homes. And then the merchant takes back the finished cloth, pays the people a little bit for their wage, takes that stuff, sells it in the towns. All right, so we have all this production, and like we said, this production is unregulated in these rural areas. They don't need to meet these guild standards. And this is because there's going to be less restrictions from the government in these rural areas. So the cottage industry becomes capable of producing a ton of different types of goods, and it's going to supply the towns and the urban areas with more stuff. And what this is going to help lead to, because there's less restrictions and it's working so well, is the growth of something called free wage labor, where how much you're paid and how much stuff costs is driven by the wages and the prices. It's driven by supply and demand, how much people want stuff and how much of it there is. And an example of this is the Le Chapelier law in 1791, which is a French law that bans guilds. So we see how the governments are now trying to create less restrictions in the economy so that there's more freedom in how people can set their prices and how much people can be paid.
So this concept of free agency and a supply and demand economy, again, is going to drive these wages and prices. And if this sounds familiar, it's because it's kind of the foundations of capitalism. We see this guy named Adam Smith who's known as the father of modern capitalism, definitely a name College Board wants you to know. Memorize it. He writes this book called Wealth of Nations in 1776, which is going to talk about unlimited government, right? The benefits of free trade, laissez faire capitalism, which is kind of government being a little bit more hands off, allowing supply and demand to drive the market behind it. Super important book and important in the evolution of capitalism.
So before we get to full on capitalism, this in between from mercantilism to capitalism, we're going to call the market economy. And so this is the development of this leads to new financial practices and makes Europe a global leader in trade. So they're going to make a ton of money off this market economy. Okay. This is an economic system, again, where prices and wages are determined by buyers and sellers. This is the idea of supply and demand, right? People want something, people are going to produce more of it. And so then they're going to sell more of it. If the people want less of it, the prices are going to go down. People aren't going to make it anymore. These are the concepts that drive our economic systems right now. So the market economy is going to slowly start to replace mercantilism. People and buyers and sellers are now in charge of the economy and how much stuff costs and how much of what gets produced, not the government. So we're replacing the idea of a government run system with the market economy.
So we're going to also see the insurance industry help the market economy grow. This is going to allow people to take risks and open new businesses a little bit easier, right? Then we see banking. We've gone over the Bank of Amsterdam again, but super important. In 1609, it's going to issue paper money. It's going to trade bills of exchange. This is going to facilitate merchant ventures at home and abroad. Really makes the Dutch take this lead in international trade, kind of behind Britain as well, but encouraging people to take those chances and in this market economy, in this supply and demand trade.
Another bank to know of is the Bank of England in 1694, a government chartered joint stock company. And again, a joint stock company is where people pool their money together to make an investment. If you didn't have enough money to own a business, you kind of work together to own it together and you share in the profits and the losses. You could think of a joint stock company as an early precursor to the stock market itself. So after we have this idea, we have tons of new private banks that get created in London and across the country and across Europe that provide credit for individuals. So you are able to take out a loan to start your business instead of having to have all the money ahead of time. So this allows lower and middle class people to create businesses, to create wealth, instead of all the wealth being created by the government or by the nobles. And a lot of these banking systems are going to come up with what's called venture capital, which again is the idea that we're going to invest. We're going to try to create big companies. We're going to invest in companies, see them grow. Good example of this is the British East India Company. There's also one called the Dutch East India Company. Those are some of the most powerful companies in the entire world ever. How much money that they had because of how they were able to trade and how they were to invest their capital, invest their money. So all of these innovations that we talked about with banking and issuing money and loans to people to help them grow is the foundation for the modern banking system and the modern financial system that we have today. And everything we've been talking about today is going to lead towards a consumer culture. It's going to lead towards capitalism away from a government run economy.
So, of everything today, we're hoping you really hear demand and food, right? With this demand or this increase in supply of food, it increases demand. We got consumer culture and the effects of that. How does society adjust? Make sure that's clear to you. So, read through these historical developments for both of these lessons. Thank you for watching. Shout out to our AP Euro kids, and we'll see you all next week for the next video.
Until then, bye.